July 16, 1940, Hall, East Prussia. Hermann Göring stood before Adolf Hitler with the kind of swagger only unbroken victory could produce. The Reichsmarshal had just watched his Luftwaffe tear through Poland in weeks, shatter French resistance in days, and send British forces scrambling across the Channel at Dunkirk. Now, with characteristic bombast, he made a promise that would haunt German military planning for generations. Give him 3 days, just 72 hours, and he would destroy RAF Fighter Command completely. Britain's aerial defense would cease to exist, clearing the skies for Operation Sea Lion, the amphibious invasion that would force Churchill's defiant island to its knees. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're enjoying this journey through history, please hit that like button and subscribe to keep these stories alive. And drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, whether it's London, Berlin, New York, or anywhere else. Your support means everything, and it helps us bring you more untold stories from the Second World War every single week. Hitler wanted to believe Göring's promise. Everything in his experience suggested the Reichsmarschall might actually deliver. The Luftwaffe had proved itself the most devastating air force in history, achieving air superiority so quickly during the Battle of France that German ground forces advanced with barely a glimpse of enemy fighters overhead. The numbers seemed to support Göring's confidence. The Luftwaffe possessed roughly 2,600 operational aircraft ready for deployment against Britain, whilst intelligence estimates suggested Fighter Command could muster perhaps 600 fighters at most. But standing in that ornate hunting lodge that July afternoon, Göring couldn't possibly know he was making the most catastrophic miscalculation in aviation history. A promise that would stretch not to 3 days, but to 4 grinding months, costing Germany 1,977 aircraft and transforming what should have been a quick victory into the Reich's first genuine defeat. And in that fundamental misunderstanding lay the seeds of Germany's first strategic failure, a failure that would change the entire trajectory of the war. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding was nicknamed Stuffy by his pilots, a taciturn, methodical officer who seemed more comfortable with technical specifications than inspiring speeches. But while other RAF commanders focused on building bomber fleets for offensive operations, Dowding obsessed over a single question: how do you defend an entire nation from aerial attack when you're outnumbered? His answer was to stop thinking about individual aircraft and start thinking about information. The backbone of his system was radar, or RDF, radio direction finding as the British called it then. By 1940, Dowding had overseen construction of a chain of 51 radar stations stretching along Britain's coast, from Scotland to Portsmouth. These stations could detect incoming aircraft at ranges up to 120 miles, giving Fighter Command roughly 20 minutes warning before raiders reached their targets. The Germans knew Britain had radar. They'd spotted the distinctive metal towers dotting the coastline, but they fundamentally misunderstood its purpose. Luftwaffe intelligence assumed these stations simply detected approaching formations, like early warning sentries posting generic alerts. They had no idea the British had worked out how to vector fighters directly onto incoming raids, while the enemy was still over water. Behind the radar chain sat the Observer Corps, 30,000 volunteers equipped with binoculars, plotting tables, and telephone connections. Once raiders crossed the coast and dropped below radar coverage, these observers tracked them visually, telephoning reports to filter rooms where WAF personnel plotted aircraft positions on enormous maps using croupier rakes to move markers across gridded tables. Every 20 seconds, these plots updated, creating a continuously refreshed picture of every aircraft movement over Britain. All this information fed into Dowding's 7-sector control rooms, which commanded individual fighter squadrons. A controller watching the plotting table could see exactly where enemy formations were heading, how many aircraft they contained, their altitude, and their speed. He could then scramble the precise number of squadrons needed to intercept them, directing pilots by radio telephone to the exact position where they'd meet the raiders. The Germans had nothing comparable. Luftwaffe fighters operated under loose directives from ground control, but lacked the continuous tracking and vectoring system that allowed British controllers to guide their pilots turn by turn onto targets. It was the difference between a blind boxer swinging at empty air and a sniper with perfect intelligence. More critically, Dowding's system meant he didn't need numerical superiority. He could concentrate force at decisive points while keeping reserves safely on the ground. August 13, 1940, Adlertag, Eagle Day, the date Göring had chosen to begin his 3-day destruction of fighter command. The morning dawned with poor weather blanketing the channel, but the Reichsmarschall wouldn't countenance delay. At 6 o'clock, the first waves began taking off from airfields across occupied France, Belgium, Holland, and Norway. By day's end, the Luftwaffe would fly 1,485 sorties, the largest single-day aerial assault in history to that point. The operation began disastrously before a single bomb fell. Morning fog delayed coordination between bomber and fighter units, and when some Dornier Do-17 bombers received late cancellation orders, their fighter escorts didn't get the message. 74 Messerschmitt Bf-110s flew their mission protecting bombers that never arrived, wasting fuel and exposing themselves to RAF fighters for no purpose whatsoever. What German intelligence had somehow failed to grasp was the difference between forward operating bases and sector stations. Luftwaffe targeting had focused obsessively on airfields in Kent and Sussex, places like Manston, Hockinge, and Lympne. But these were simply forward airstrips where fighters refueled and rearmed between sorties. The actual sector stations controlling RAF operations, with their operations rooms, communication centers, and plotting tables, sat further inland at places like Biggin Hill, Kenley, and Hornchurch. The afternoon raids hit hard nonetheless. At 3 o'clock, a massive formation of Junkers Ju-88s attacked Detling Airfield with devastating accuracy, destroying 22 aircraft and killing 67 personnel. Göring's staff celebrated the strike as proof of concept. Then intelligence reports arrived. Detling belonged to Coastal Command, not Fighter Command. They'd just expended considerable effort destroying reconnaissance aircraft that posed no threat to German bombers whatsoever. Meanwhile, actual fighter command stations barely registered damage. RAF controllers watching German formations on their plotting tables scrambled squadrons with precise timing. Squadron leader James Nicholson, flying a Hurricane with 249 Squadron, intercepted a formation of Junkers Ju-88s over Southampton. His aircraft took hits from a Messerschmitt Bf-110, setting his cockpit ablaze. But Nicholson remained in his burning Hurricane long enough to shoot down the German fighter before bailing out with severe burns. By nightfall on Eagle Day, Luftwaffe crews reported destroying 98 British aircraft. The actual number was 13. German intelligence had mistaken damaged aircraft for destroyed ones, counted the same wrecks multiple times, and accepted wildly inflated pilot claims without verification. Meanwhile, Fighter Command had shot down 46 German aircraft, real losses confirmed by wreckage scattered across England. The mathematics of Göring's 3-day timeline was already collapsing. August 15, 1940. Luftwaffe bomber crews, promised minimal fighter opposition, instead encountered wave after wave of British fighters that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The Spitfire, they'd been assured, was decent enough, but nothing the Messerschmitt Bf-109 couldn't handle. The Hurricane was supposedly obsolete, a lumbering target that would fall easily to superior German fighters. These assessments weren't just wrong, they were catastrophically, fatally wrong. The Hurricane carried 8 Browning 303 machine guns capable of pouring 9,600 rounds per minute into a target. Pilots discovered this wasn't just a weapon system, it was a flying chainsaw. The concentrated firepower could saw the tail off a bomber in a 3-second burst. Then, there was the Spitfire. By August 1940, Supermarines factories were delivering roughly 100 Spitfires monthly. The Mark Burton Spitfire, powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin III engine producing 1,030 horsepower, could reach 362 miles per hour, faster than the Messerschmitt Bf-109 at most combat altitudes. Its turning circle was tighter, its rate of roll superior, and in the hands of a competent pilot, it could outmaneuver anything the Luftwaffe possessed. German fighter pilots began filing reports that their commanders initially refused to believe. Oberleutnant Julius Neumann, flying with Jagdgeschwader 27, wrote in his diary after combat on August 16th that British fighters were appearing in far greater numbers than intelligence promised, and that the Spitfire is faster than we were told and climbs like a homesick angel. By August 1940, Fighter Command operated more Hurricanes than Spitfires, roughly 32 Hurricane squadrons versus 19 Spitfire squadrons, which meant the aircraft Luftwaffe intelligence had dismissed as negligible was actually the primary threat to German bombers. On August 17th, Luftwaffe bombers attacked in force again. They claimed 78 British fighters destroyed. The actual number was 8. Meanwhile, Fighter Command had shot down 71 German aircraft. The 3-day promise was now 4 days old, and Fighter Command was stronger than when the battle began. August 19, 1940. Karen Hall. Göring summoned his fighter commanders for what became known as the Conference of Recrimination. The Reichsmarschall arrived furious that his 3-day promise had stretched to nearly a week without Fighter Command showing any sign of collapse. Rather than acknowledging faulty intelligence, he accused his fighter pilots of cowardice. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 pilots, he thundered, were failing to protect the bombers properly. From now on, fighters would fly in close formation with the bombers they escorted, so close they'd be essentially shackled to the slower aircraft. Fighter commanders tried explaining this was tactical madness. The Bf 109's advantage was speed and altitude. Forcing it to throttle back and stay level with lumber-laden Heinkels threw away every strength German fighters possessed. Göring wouldn't hear it. Oberst Adolf Galland later wrote that this single decision reduced the fighter force to the level of the bombers. The impact was immediate and devastating. Messerschmitt pilots, previously able to climb above RAF formations and dive onto them with speed advantage, now had to waddle across the channel at bomber speed and altitude, perfect targets for Spitfires that could approach from above. On August 24th, RAF fighters savaged a heavily escorted bomber formation attacking Portsmouth, shooting down 12 aircraft, despite the protective screen of Messerschmitts flying uselessly alongside. Then came Göring's second catastrophic decision. On the night of August 24th, a lost Luftwaffe bomber crew accidentally dropped their payload on central London, killing civilians in Bethnal Green. Churchill ordered immediate retaliation. RAF bombers hit Berlin the following night. The damage was negligible, but Hitler had personally promised the German people that enemy bombs would never fall on the capital. Hitler's rage gave Göring an opportunity to escape his failing strategy. On September 7th, after 2 weeks of grinding attrition against RAF airfields that was slowly working, Göring shifted the Luftwaffe's entire focus to London. It was presented as retaliation, but the real motivation was simpler. Attacking cities produced dramatic results that looked good in newsreels. The decision saved Fighter Command. RAF sector stations like Biggin Hill, Kenley, and Tangmere had taken serious damage throughout late August. Another week of concentrated attacks might have actually disrupted Dowding's control system. Instead, Göring pulled his bombers away from the targets that mattered and sent them against a city that had no tactical value whatsoever. Dowding's controllers watched German formations heading for London on their plotting tables and scrambled squadrons with perfect coordination. Göring's 3-day promise had always been arithmetically impossible. In July 1940, British factories delivered 496 fighters, 329 Hurricanes, and 167 Spitfires. German intelligence estimated Britain could produce perhaps 180 fighters monthly at most. They were off by nearly 300 aircraft. August brought 523 new British fighters. September delivered 467. Lord Beaverbrook, Churchill's Minister of Aircraft Production, had performed something close to an industrial miracle. He'd ruthlessly cannibalized training aircraft for parts, established shadow factories across Britain, and implemented repair facilities that could return damaged aircraft to service within days. Crashed fighters that German pilots counted as kills often returned to combat within 72 hours. Beaverbrook even established civilian repair organization units that could rebuild aircraft with up to 60% structural damage. German aircraft production in July 1940 delivered 164 Messerschmitt Bf 109s. August brought 173. Britain was outbuilding Germany in fighters by a ratio exceeding 3-to-1, and the gap was widening. But production numbers only mattered if you had pilots to fly the aircraft. Dowding operated on a 3-tier rotation structure. Frontline squadrons in 11 Group defending southeastern England fought intensively for 2 weeks, then rotated north to quieter sectors for rest and retraining. This meant Luftwaffe bomber crews faced fresh, well-rested pilots on nearly every mission. German fighter units had no such luxury. They flew from the same French airfields day after day, accumulating exhaustion, watching squadron mates fail to return. By early September, Jagdgeschwader 26 had lost 40% of its pilots killed or seriously wounded. These losses couldn't be replaced. Germany's pilot training infrastructure couldn't produce skilled fighter pilots at the rate Britain's system was destroying them. Between August 13th and September 6th, Fighter Command lost 276 aircraft in combat. During the same period, British factories delivered 1,476 new fighters. The Luftwaffe destroyed fewer aircraft in a month than Britain produced in 6 days. Meanwhile, German bomber losses exceeded 400 aircraft. September 15, 1940. The skies cleared over the Channel by mid-morning, and Luftwaffe commanders assembled the largest formations they'd yet thrown at London. Göring ordered 2 massive waves that would finally break Fighter Command's resistance. The first formation, numbering over 200 aircraft, crossed the Kent coast at 11 o'clock. What the Germans didn't know was that Churchill himself was visiting 11 Group's operations room at Uxbridge that morning, standing on the gallery above the plotting table. The Prime Minister watched as controller indicators around the room's periphery lit up, each bulb representing a squadron scrambling to intercept. More squadrons scrambled, more lights illuminated. Churchill turned to Air Vice Marshal Keith Park and asked, "What other reserves have we?" Park's reply was stark. "There are none. Every serviceable fighter in southeastern England was airborne." Fighter Command threw 276 fighters at that first formation, and what should have been Germany's overwhelming advantage evaporated in a sprawling air battle that stretched from the Kent coast to the London suburbs. Squadron leader Douglas Bader, leading the Duxford wing of 5 squadrons, 60 fighters operating as a single-mast formation, tore into the bomber stream over North London. Spitfires from 609 Squadron dove through the Messerschmitt escort, forcing German fighters to break formation, while Hurricanes from 242 Squadron hammered the exposed bombers. The coordinated attack shattered German cohesion. Bomber crews, seeing British fighters appearing in unprecedented numbers, jettisoned their loads wherever they fell and turned for home. The second wave arrived at 2 o'clock, even larger than the first. Luftwaffe commanders assured bomber crews that Fighter Command must have exhausted itself during the morning battle. Instead, British fighters rose to meet them in numbers that seemed impossible. Park had executed another precisely timed rotation. Damaged aircraft had landed, refueled, and rearmed while fresh squadrons scrambled from satellite airfields. Flight Lieutenant Brian Lane, leading 92 Squadron, intercepted a formation of Dornier 17s over Canterbury. His combat report describes the bombers' panic. The enemy formation split up completely. Several Du-17s were seen to go down in flames, and others broke away and jettisoned their bombs indiscriminately. This wasn't the disciplined aerial assault Göring had promised. This was a routed force fleeing for the Channel. By nightfall, Fighter Command had flown 597 sorties. The RAF claimed 185 German aircraft destroyed. The actual number was closer to 60, but even that represented catastrophic losses the Luftwaffe couldn't sustain. 2 days later, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The barges assembled in Channel ports began dispersing. Göring's 3-day promise had stretched to 35 days, and Fighter Command was still there. The battle officially continued until October 31, 1940. 4 months had passed since Göring made his 3-day promise. When historians finally tallied the actual losses, the numbers revealed just how catastrophically wrong the Reichsmarschall had been. The Luftwaffe lost 1,977 aircraft destroyed or damaged beyond repair between July 10th and October 31st. Fighter Command lost 1,074 aircraft, still a grievous toll, but sustainable because British factories replaced them faster than German bombers could destroy them. The Luftwaffe lost 535 Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the fighter that was supposed to sweep British opposition from the skies. Gone with them were pilots who'd cut their teeth in Spain and Poland, irreplaceable veterans whose training had taken years. Germany lost 279 Messerschmitt Bf-110s, the twin-engine heavy fighter that proved too slow and unmaneuverable to survive against Spitfires. The bomber losses cut even deeper. 569 Heinkel, He-111s, the backbone of the Luftwaffe's medium bomber force, failed to return from missions over Britain. 321 Dornier Do-17s followed them down. 223 Junkers Ju-87s, the vaunted Stuka dive bomber that had terrorized Poland and France, proved catastrophically vulnerable and were withdrawn from the battle entirely. By late October 1940, much of the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. Bomber losses were staggering. 569 Heinkel He-111s and 535 Messerschmitt Bf-109s destroyed. Millions of man-hours of skilled labor turned into wreckage across England. Every plane lost over Britain was one that couldn't fight on the Eastern Front. Fighter Command, meanwhile, ended the battle stronger than it began, its factories outproducing Germany 3-1. The Battle of Britain didn't just save an island, it reshaped warfare. Dowding's integrated air defense system proved that intelligence, coordination, and timing could triumph over superior numbers. It shattered the myth that the bomber will always get through, and became the blueprint for modern air defense. Göring's promised 72 hours had stretched to 114 days, and in those days, Germany's aura of invincibility vanished. The roar of Merlin engines over southern England marked not defeat, but defiance. Britain had survived, the Reich had stumbled, and history had quietly begun to turn.